Welcome. And we'll start off, of course, with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And we are, of course, looking at Acharei Mot. And here it is. So I do want to continue with the Rashis, but there's a really beautiful Torah Temimah, which I thought you might enjoy. So we will do that. And here it is. Acharei Mot v'gomer. Tanya. So there is, as you know from this word at this point, that it's introducing an early source of Mishnaic origins around the same period prior to the year 200. Lama hu maskir mitatan b'yom haKippurim. So he goes a step further. We discussed the question as to why the mention of the death of Aaron's two sons. But the point is it has to do with Yom HaKippurim on Yom Kippur. Why? What's the connection? Lelamedcha, to teach you, shekeshem sheyom HaKippurim mechaper al Yisrael, to teach you that just as the Day of Atonement, Yom HaKippurim, atones for the Jewish people, kach mitatan shel tzadikim mechaperet al Yisrael, so the death of the righteous atones for Israel. And this is in the Yerushalmi Yoma. And you certainly, I would say, before we go into the Torah Temimah's interpretation of this, I would say that on the surface, this sounds awfully similar to Christianity in a certain kind of way. The idea of an individual acting at the death of an individual acting as an atonement offering. And I'm not saying it's not there, but that isn't the way Torah Temimah's got to handle it. So he says, Lo nitba'er erech ha'inyan. So he says the value, I guess erech is usually the value of this matter. It's not so clarified, shemitat tzadikim mechaper, that the way in which the death of the righteous atones. Umat tam badavar, and what's the reason? Why would we say such a thing? V'nir'eh, and it appears al pi ma shekatuv bepirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, by what is written, we find in this midrash called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, Perek Yud Zayin, chapter 17, B'inyan mitat Shaul, regarding the matter of Saul's death. King Saul died on the battlefield. He was losing and realized that all was lost, and basically he died on Mount Gilboa. And of course the Philistines felt very victorious that day. Dichtiv Bey, regarding it's mentioned, Shmuel Bet Kaf Aleph, the second book of Samuel, chapter 21, Vayikbaru et atzmot Shaul. So what happened was the people came, the Jewish people came, or the Israelites came, and they buried the bones of Saul. Vayetar Elohim la'aretz acharei chen. And God, yetar, it's an interesting word, but it's a synonym for prayer. And the reason why is that the word eter is a pitchfork. And just as pitchfork turns over grain, so this prayer is understood to turn over the midat hadin, the quality of judgment, to midat harachamim, that in this sincere supplication of God, God's quality of judgment turns to the quality of mercy. And essentially it's saying that God had mercy on the land after this story about how they buried the bones of Saul. V'zeh leshono. Okay, this is a quote, I believe. That's what this means. Kevan shira'ah HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Oh, sorry. No, this is what it says in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, I'm going to assume. It says, Kevan, he's quoting Parkei Rabbi Eliezer, Kevan sheraha kadosh baruch hu, that because the Holy One, blessed be He, saw, shegamlu lo chesed, that they, we talk about gemilut chasadim, right? That they did this true act of chesed, of loving kindness to Saul in taking him and giving him a proper burial. And not only that, shetzamu, they fasted, uvachu, and they cried. I did know what this was. I think it's Vesafdu law, and they mourned for him. Kemevu'ar bapasuk, as is detailed in the actual verse in Samuel. Miyad mitpalei rachamim. Immediately, God was filled with mercy. Shene'emar, as it says, Vayetar Elohim la'aretz, that God took pity on the land, v'chule, etc. Adkan, and that's the end of the quote from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Mevu'ar mizeh, so this makes it clear, shelo hamita ba'atzma mechaperet, that it isn't so much the death itself which atones, ela hakavod v'ha'evel, but rather the honor and the mourning, shenohagin b'mitat tzadikim, that the public displays regarding the death of the righteous, to kavod zeh, because showing such honor to the righteous, hu kvod Hashem, it's tantamount to honor for God. Reactions.
So
I like it better than the idea that it was the death itself, because, as you said, it's not how we understand death.
Mm-hmm.
So when they say the death atones for righteous, by death they didn't just mean the act of dying, but the whole process that it brought about.
Yes, that's what Baruch Halevi Epstein wants us to understand. Now, I will be honest with you. I love this interpretation. It's a beautiful interpretation. And I also accept the interpretation, but I do not believe that is the mere intention. I believe there really is the intention of understanding that there is a sense in which there is personal sacrifice involved. I think it's there. That it is a huge sacrifice for the community when a righteous person passes away. That there's level of spiritual blessing that comes about through the presence of a righteous individual. But not only that, but when that righteous individual passes away, not only that in and itself, it's, even though that person's presence is no longer there, there is a continuous blessing even in that person's death. That I think is the part of the point that's being made here. That they're not only a source of blessing in their lifetime, but even in their death, even in their passing, they're a source of blessing.
That's a different approach than,
being
what they gave during their lifetime,
yes,
remains to some extent after their death. It's not that God is looking for death. That God is hoping that people will commit self-sacrifice or become martyrs. It's not like martyrdom is the point.
So I think that it may actually try to be opening up some doors for us to look at death in a different kind of way. Look, death, as I love to say, is absolutely the most democratic institution of all time. And I realize that it doesn't seem as if most people these days, at least in Western cultures, meditate too much on the fact that we are here for such a short time. And that pushes us in a certain direction as to how we want to use our lives. That death is actually a great instructor, but that also that there is something positive on the other side of things. That death is not necessarily a bad thing, except in its relationship to this world. Of course, though, when wicked people, are no longer around, that is a source of blessing too. But by and large, we like to think that, that life is given to us to make this world a better place. So, but I do think there's a lot being packed in here as to in terms of that initial statement, and then there's the beautiful explanation of Baruch Halevi Epstein. But we are talking about atonement here, and we are going to be talking about animals being put to death. And incidentally, they do say in our tradition that in terms of our own personal atonement, that our own death atones for 99.9% of the sins we've committed in this life.
And possibly the animals are substitutes for the human
I'm sure
being, so that it's really
yes.
like it's humans, sacrifice, but we don't want to do that. So
Correct.
we symbolically use an animal.
Right.
But the concept of the sacrifice of the human being is still there, just symbolic in the use of the animal.
I'm absolutely certain of it. And in fact, that is actually the real takeaway of the story of the Akedah. The Akedah is that transitional moment, and it's stated in other places explicitly. This isn't just me speculating, that what God taught Abraham in that moment is by substituting the ram for Isaac, is that God did not want us to sacrifice human beings. And that rams, and the fact that it took place on Mount Moriah, which of course was the location of the temple, it's all there, okay? And that in fact the animal is an acceptable alternative.
That the human is not an acceptable alternative.
Correct. The human is
right, but it's the concept.
God doesn't want us to kill ourselves or our children for His sake. That's not the kind of God we worship.
No, but on the other hand, remember, we've got the death of Aaron's 2 sons. Okay, we have that.
Which is often interpreted as a punishment for misbehavior.
It is interpreted that way, but it's also interpreted as an act of martyrdom. It's ambiguous. And here's the thing, the dynamic is such: if God gives us life, does God have a right to take that life? And the answer is undeniably.
And there's a difference between God taking the life and our doing it ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But what I was trying to say is, yes, we use the animal, but the animal's life to us is meaningless, except for in the fact that it symbols that we are sacrificing ourselves.
Well, we all know that.
Not exactly. I mean, it's part of the wealth of the ancient world. It was a valuable thing.
I think beyond that too, by the way, I think
that's why it's a sacrifice. I mean, in the sense, what I mean by meaningless, I don't mean it had no monetary value, but the sacrifice is ours more than it's theirs. It's not their soul that's meaningful in a religious perspective. The sacrifice is ours, not the animals.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to say is that as I understand it, if you're a farmer, let's say you're a dairy farmer, you develop a relationship between yourself and the animals. They aren't merely, maybe not so much with chickens, who knows, but for sure with cows. I think that, the farmers very often will name them. Okay, they're not nameless. And certainly certainly in days prior to milking machines and, that kind of thing, it was your animal. It wasn't exactly a pet, but on the other hand, it was a living thing, and you did have a relationship with it. So, taking this and having to kill it quite possibly had an emotional element to it as well. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not saying in every case. Yeah.
They kill dairy cattle?
Yeah. Well, if they required a cow, yeah, if that's what you had.
It was a dairy cattle, not a beef cattle?
Who knows? It could be. Could
Whatever.
be. It does. Let's put it this way. I haven't read anywhere where it makes a distinction. Okay. So I mean, in many cases, it's a bull. It's not a, but even so, a bull clearly has value as well.
Don't
Except
even
for you
know.
said that they were female animals and you're not supposed to get rid of, you're not supposed to sacrifice and or kill the mother and the child in the same
Correct.
day.
Right. In
Right.
some cases, well,
Right.
for example, we talk about the para
Right.
aduma. Par is a bull, a para is a cow.
Right.
In this case, it's a par. It's not a para. But the para aduma was a heifer. So let's go on.
Well, I have one more thing to say.
Sure.
To kill a milk cow is to kill something that will give you life
Right.
for its entire life. To kill a beef cattle is one that is killed for that specific purpose of being brought into this life to be slaughtered as a piece of beef.
But Lisa,
I'm
when did
curious.
they- when
What-
did they, wait, I haven't said anything yet, so let me talk first. But when did they start differentiating between beef and milk animals?
That was
Because
my
those
exact
were
question.
bred, those are made separate, those were bred, and they may have been bred separately then or not.
Good point. I don't know.
Okay. All I know is that to this point, I have not read of differentiation. It just says a bull, it just says a cow, and that's it. And besides which, not all these people were wealthy and had large herds. So, and if what we're doing in this discussion is bringing out a little bit more of a sense in which it really was a sacrifice and not simply substituting an animal for the person, but that it did involve some personal level of sacrifice, I think that's a good thing. I think that's the point, is that we should not be, I'm struggling, sorry for a word, but not to consider life very important. Look at how human life is treated when we read about these shootings and things like that. How are people viewing human life, right? The cavalier, that we should be cavalier about life. And I think the purpose is that we shouldn't be, but it's so easy to become that way. Human beings are capable of it, sadly. So that's what I think it's about as well. All right. Yes. Let's go on here. Golda, just in response to your chat about Jacob knowing how to breed flocks. Yes, of course, they were wealthy people, but to assume that most farmers were wealthy, I don't know that we can do that. So let's keep going here. I'm looking to see. Yeah, I went on quite a little bit. Right, we read about the fact that he had to immerse himself every time he changed his clothes. Let's see then that would be this verse up here. Right, we did this, I remember. We talked about the clothing, the linen clothing, and how that clothing was exactly the same as the regular priest, that on this particular day, he wasn't distinguished by his special garments. And let's go from here. We'll go from verse 5. Ume'et adat b'nei Yisrael, and from the congregation of the children of Israel, yikach shnei seirei izim lechatat, he should take 2 goats as a sin offering. V'ayal echad le'olah, and a single ram as an olah, as a whole offering. V'hikriv Aharon et par hachatat asher lo. So now he's taken those animals, and now he's going to start performing the rites. V'hikriv Aharon et par hachatat asher lo. Aaron should present the bull of the sin offering, which is his. V'chiper ba'ado, and he should make atonement for himself, uva'at beito, and for his household. et par hachatat asher lo, the bull of the sin offering, which is his. Ha'amur lamala, it was already mentioned above that he was to take, it started very off. The very first offering he had to bring was this bull, right, that mentioned of us as a sin offering. Ulimedcha kan, and here it teaches you, shemisha lohu ba, that he had to pay for it himself. It came from his own personal finances. Velo mishel tzibur, was not paid for by public funds. That's because it says asher lo, which was his. And he shall make atonement for himself and for his household. This is from the tractate Yoma, Lamed Vav 36, and also from Torah Kohanim, the Midrash on Leviticus. Mitvadeh alav, he has to make confession upon it. Avonotav, his sins, his transgressions, va'avonot beito, and the transgressions of his house. And the truth is that on Yom Kippur, we do these al-chaitz and ashamnus, and the truth is they're supposed to be, and they're, even though it's so easy to sort of go into rote recitation, they actually are supposed to remind us of the specific sins we have committed during the year. I mean, part of that atonement, and Maimonides has a beautiful, in his Mishnah Torah, he has a beautiful section on Hilchot Tshuva, the laws of Tshuva. But the truth is, we are supposed to take this day and make explicit statement to God of the specific things that we have done wrong. I like to say, because it's an abuse that I've seen so many times of people who try to accuse other people of generalized, one of the worst is saying, oh, so-and-so, they're a disaster, without specifying in what sense they're a disaster. And so often I think all of us tend to focus on the emotional, the emotions that are put inside of us as a result of a specific act, and then don't go back and look at the act carefully and say, wait a second, what was upsetting about this? What wasn't upsetting about this? What did I contribute to this? What did the other person contribute? And that is really part of the process. So we're saying that, before Aaron could act as the one to represent the Jewish people, by gaining atonement for them on Yom Kippur, he had to make sure his own house was in order. Job number one is getting your own act together. And I don't think that's something that is really valued in general, the need to make sure we get our own act together first. And I think that's a great thing. It's a very great spiritual thing. At any rate,
but it also could be the fact, and unfortunately, that many times what you're left with after an incident is your emotional reaction to it, as opposed to remembering the details, right? So
Right.
when you say something about someone else or what's happened to you or whatever it is, that's what's left with you is your feelings about it, as opposed to, thinking at the time, what were the specifics, that caused it, etc. So unfortunately, that's what happens. And then when it comes to, Yom Kippur, you don't remember any of it, right, by that point, or you might not remember all of it. So that's
Well, yeah. Speak for yourself, because maybe it's my psychoanalytic training or whatever, but I completely, I feel the emotion, but then something is, when I can come out of it, I can certainly, and sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes I consciously can put it into context and help myself come out of it. But no, I definitely, and I always probably have, thought very closely about the details of everything, that I'm very analytical, and especially in my own life and my own choices. And I have no problem relating to the al-chaitz and everything, because it's just so easy to remember specifics for me that go with the feelings. Maybe it's just some learning how to do it.
No, I remember most of the specifics, but I mean, if I talk to most people that I've talked to a lot of people, they don't necessarily remember the specifics about why they made that statement. I mean, I deal with that, a lot of times in work situations, people will react to somebody, and then when you ask them for specifics, they don't have it. So
But-
I don't think it's human nature. I mean, that might be your training, that might
You
be
can get
people-
there.
Yeah, but it takes a lot of work to do it, and it's not necessarily that people are conscious of that on a level that you would hope that they would be.
Consciousness is huge.
Yeah,
You
so
can
that's
develop
my-
that, yeah,
Yeah, that's my point. Not everybody is that conscious, and
for sure.
yeah, and I think that, yeah, so I think this is, the point here is to teach us to be conscious on that level, so that we do have that knowledge. But unfortunately, it's not something that is carried forward. So anyway, that was my point. Anyway, so
It's
Sorry.
just not a given.
nope,
that you
it's not a
can't
given.
do it.
Yep.
And not only that, there's that statement, there's that proverb, give a dog a bad name and hang him, right? And I've seen this in the work situation as well, where people are said to be a bad worker and no specifics are given. And frankly, that's not helpful.
Nope.
If you're going to try and change behavior, you've got to let a person know what the specifics are and what the specific example is of it. I'm going to stop the share at this point, and being mindful of time. And I'm going to also thank the people who have joined us for this lesson and stop the recording.